Nothing is normal. I'll not be fine. Not anymore. Everything feels tawdry and cheap. No matter what kind of meaning or purpose I think my life used to have, well, that's all gone now. Reverberated away like a beautiful song sung into the wind. It can only travel so far before it dims into nothing. This is my life now. I'm on the cusp of accepting it. It's only a matter of time until I'm all used up. With my new purpose fulfilled, I'll move on. The cycle will continue. Whatever it's done with me, I'll be like one of them. Just one more of them. That's the only part I can't accept. No matter my denial, I know it's inevitable. I grew up wanting to be a singer, to create something temporary and beautiful with little more than a breath and a piece of my soul merged into it. It was my dream. I wanted to be able to move people with the sound of my words, to make them feel genuine emotion by vibrating my vocal cords in a manner that brought feeling, whether it was joy, elation, intrigue, even sadness. I grew up listening to the great opera performers and envying their talent, their dedication, to convey so much feeling. It's as if they're feeling that emotion themselves, completely and fully, so fully that it overflows out and infects those within earshot, causing them to feel as well. I don't envy them anymore. Since my run-in with the worms, I now have that gift. Except the things I infect with my audience are sinister. I can only express what the worms feel. You don't want to feel what the worms feel. They say that due to the way their nervous system is developed, or rather lack of developed, worms can't actually feel anything. They're annelids, possessing no brain, with a single nerve cord running through the length of their body. Scientists think that because of this, they can't feel pain. They can't think. Their primitive anatomy would have them believe that they're mindless little decomposers, their only purpose to consume and convert old dead things into nutrient-rich waste. Little organic fertilizer machines. I wonder how those same scientists would feel if they could see what I had, if they could hear me sing the worms song. They would feel how everybody else feels when they hear it. It cannot be put into words. For worms, they don't have any words, but the effect of it is undeniable. To dissect the feeling and pick it apart would be an exercise in futility, a lesson of hubris. The results would be irrelevant. Thinking back to that day, I wonder what my life would be if I had never stumbled into that hole. If my friends had never invited me hiking at the base of that gargantuan mountain, or had I made up excuses as to why I couldn't go, my life might be different, might be normal. Had I never decided to stray from the well-beaten path and fallen into that hole, I might have been able to fulfill my dream of becoming an opera singer eventually on my own, not with the creature's perpetual curse infecting my larynx, coiling its way around my trachea. Had I never went to investigate that gorgeous siren song that, in truth, was a swan song, I may have lived a life full of life experiences instead of cursed half-life I'm now burdened with. The worm's head worming its way up my epiglottis like a charmed cobra every time I sing. Had I not screamed when I was face to face with those half-rotten corpses, surrounded and wedged into the bottom of that chasm by the petrified remains, then perhaps one of them wouldn't have slithered its way down my throat so easily. All the cadavers' mouths hung open as the demon worms sang their beautiful and deadly chorus from what was left of their hosts, their heads poking through the open throats of rotten flesh. Had I not chickened out of ending my own life once my new parasite made its intentions known, maybe the worm's tendrils wouldn't be worming their way deeper and deeper into my brain right now. My dream of becoming famous is now my nightmare, because I know once I'm on that stage, hundreds of eyes and ears on me, the worm will sing her misbegotten song, Chaos will erupt. Maybe not at first, perhaps not for a long time, but once the notes go into their ears, then eventually they will belong to the worms. It takes time for a flower to bloom, just like it takes time for a corpse to decompose. But once it starts, there's really no stopping the process. The children of the worms gestate, being born from the mere sound alone. The seed is planted, the egg is laid. When they finally hatch, they will feed on the various blood and cerebrospinal fluids that they need until they mature, at which time they begin controlling their gracious host. Little things at first. They have to learn how to walk before they can run, after all. It may start with the twitching of a limb, the spasm of a muscle. Once they further develop, simple spasms and twitches become more refined. The kicking of a small animal, the slapping of a coworker. When they're closing in on the end of their life cycle, they have full control. The murder of a friend, the mutilation of a loved one. When they're nearing the end, having lived a full and productive life, they find somewhere secluded, usually somewhere isolated, but with a great chance of being heard. Their siblings, who were all born from the same song, or what's left of them, began to congregate, usually in clusters of about a dozen. With their help, they began digging a hole. It's deep, just wide enough to accommodate the cluster of their host bodies, with room for one unsuspecting victim in the middle. The shaft, oddly acoustic in its properties. They crawl in and they wait. They wait while their hosts slowly decompose. They wait to be taught how to sing. They wait for Mother to come and teach them. With their mother's dying song, they learn. Only one at a time will get to go on and continue with their own life cycle, to infect another host so it too can sing for the world. I know all of this because the worm wants me to know. It wants me to understand, in hopes that with understanding would come some sense of the grand purpose, to know that my death won't be in vain. I've been under the control of the worm for some time now, and have become an observer of my own life. The mother worm, the one that sings to create its children, doesn't start out in the brain like its kids do, and doesn't indulge in violence. It nests in the esophagus of its hosts, and with time, grows little tendrils that invade the sinus cavities, eventually making its way to the brain. Because of this, it takes longer to reach its final stage of life, and therefore longer to take full control of its host. There are still brief periods where I resume control, and I write this during one of those, snippets of clarity that grow shorter and shorter every time. Before the worm had any control, after I was rescued from that god-awful pit, I found that my singing voice had improved exponentially. I could hit vocal ranges that I never dreamed I'd be able to master, much less even accomplish successfully. My voice was sublime, utter perfection. I used my newfound skills to seize my dream of getting leading role after leading role, my fame and accolades growing with each performance. As my fame grew, so too did the influence of the worm, branching deeper and deeper. This evening's performance will be televised, and I plead with you, do not view it. The worm almost has complete control, and tonight's performance will be the inseminating one. Never has a worm gotten to sing its impregnating song to such a large audience, and I fear all of the chaos and murder it will cause down the line. I want to kill myself, to end it all, but the worm has enough control over me now, even in my brief waking spells, to stop me every single time. I need to hurry. I can feel it waking again. If, by some miracle, the worm doesn't find and delete this, please, for the love of everything I hold dear, don't listen to my voice. It's not really me. It's the Requiem of the Worm. My ex-husband always used to jump scare me. It was one of the things I hated the most about him. Well, he's doing it again. The most frustrating part is that he's been dead for 5 years. First, it was just slightly off-putting. It was in the earliest days of dating him. He'd be at my apartment, and I'd excuse myself to use the bathroom. He'd be waiting in some doorway or shadow to jump out and scare the crap out of me. It was even worse at his house. He lived way out in the middle of nowhere, and I was pretty much always low-level scared out there. But then he'd leap out from around a corner, and I'd be so scared I'd pee myself. I'd be ready to break up with him then and there, every time. In retrospect, that's obviously what I should have done. But I guess we all ignore our own inner voices sometimes, don't we? Well, obviously, or there wouldn't be so many people posting on No Sleep, trying to get other people to help them with dire problems they created by doing something stupid. Yet, here we are. I don't know why I let it slide, honestly. And that was only one of the many things about him that was terrible. Nonetheless, I repeatedly told him to cut it out, and I repeatedly did nothing when he failed to cut it out. Eventually, I even married him. He had 2 kids from a previous marriage who stayed with us a lot. And when they were there were also nieces and nephews staying over. I always liked when there was a house full of kids. It made the old, drafty, falling-down farmhouse we lived in slightly less terrifying. But you could count on my ex-husband to screw up a good thing. We were in the living room with all the kids. It was late at night. The kids were all still rowdy and playing around, he and I on the couch. There was a scary movie playing, which nobody was really paying any attention to. But Eric, my ex, got a funny look on his face and said quietly to me, "Watch this." Then he put his fingers to his lips to express that I should keep quiet. I instantly knew he was probably thinking of orchestrating some huge jump scare on all these kids. Even though he had actually given me a warning at least, I just didn't want him to do it. The youngest kid was only 4. I knew it would immediately kill the good vibes. I tried to protest, but he shushed me again, then scurried off to some other part of the house, unnoticed by any of the kids. I sighed angrily. I even tried to warn the kids, but they were all hyper and not really listening. Seconds later, Eric showed up outside the screen door and revved his chainsaw. The kids lost it. One of his daughters actually blasted backwards and got airborne in her desperation to get away from the door. The 4-year-old, of course, burst into hysterical tears, and soon they were all crying. Now, some of you reading this are probably laughing and thinking that's actually pretty funny. But the thing was, it was just so damn old. He did this dumb crap all the time. Plus, the world can really be boiled down into precisely 2 types of people. People who think it's funny to scare 4-year-olds so they cry, and people who don't. So, readers, I suppose you've sorted yourselves into teams at this point. Fast forward a few years from the dumbass chainsaw incident, and Eric and I had a son of our own. The thing about our son was that he had major, and I mean major, heart problems at birth. He had to have open-heart surgery, and he had a slew of other complications. No, that's not the point of the story, but just know that the first 8 months of his life were very touch and go. Then he was finally doing better, stronger even, able to do more. He was 9 months old, sitting on my lap, facing me. We were playing and chatting with each other when Eric lunged up behind me, grabbed him, and shouted. My little son did that thing little kids do when, for one full second, you don't know if they're going to burst into hysterical tears or laughter. In the end, my son burst into laughter. So did Eric. I, on the other hand, was livid. Who jump scares an infant, first of all? Secondly, who the hell jump scares an infant heart patient? That was probably the rudest I've ever been to Eric about the jump scare thing. But he just kept laughing the whole thing off, like he always did. Anyway, that wasn't why I divorced him, but we were divorced by the time our son was 3. We shared custody, and it went about how you'd expect things to go with a douchebag. But life proceeded, I suppose. When our son was about 10, he went through this phase where he started getting insanely jumpy. I mean, he just seemed incredibly paranoid. If I walked close to him or made any sudden movements, he'd flinch, almost like he thought I was going to hit him. At first, it actually sort of hurt my feelings. I had never hit my son. I didn't understand why he was being so jumpy with me. Then it started to scare me, because I wondered if someone else was hitting him. Maybe he was being bullied at school. He didn't go to his father's much at all, and I didn't imagine Eric would ever hit him. But, what if? Then I remembered the jump scaring. I finally thought to ask my son about it. He immediately revealed that, yeah, his dad jump scared him. All the time. "It's kind of annoying, Mom," he told me. Well, yeah, I thought. I couldn't believe I'd forgotten about it. I was so mad. He only spent limited time with our son. Why was Eric spending it jump scaring him so much that it was making him nervous and anxious all the time? What kind of crap was that? The problem was that Eric was the sort of co-parent that if I asked him for help with anything, or to back me up on anything, he'd do the exact opposite, just to be spiteful. Asking nicely never worked with him. So, if it wasn't something court-ordered, I didn't even really bother asking, because I knew he would just get worse. And let's face it, no family court is going to give a crap about somebody getting scared. I was mad as hell, but there wasn't really much I could do about it. Fortunately, he took the liberty of dying, and that took care of it. I don't mean to sound callous. Obviously, our son struggled with the death of his father, but the jumpiness subsided basically instantly after he found out that his dad was dead. Now, if your child's mental health improves because you die, it's probably because you were a crappy parent. I'm just saying. Anyway, another 5 years went by. Then I wrecked my car because a cat jumped out in front of me. I sat there in shock, gripping the steering wheel of my wrecked car. As I tried to catch my breath and make sense of what had happened, I noticed something strange. The air around me had grown cold, and a chill ran down my spine. I looked around, but no one was there. I tried to shake it off and focus on getting out of the car, but then I heard it. A low, guttural laugh echoed around me, and I froze. It sounded like my ex-husband's laugh, the man who had tormented me for years, emotionally and physically. I felt a surge of anger and fear wash over me, and I knew I needed to get out of there. I managed to escape the car and run to my house, but the eerie feeling never left me. Over the next few days, strange things started happening. I would hear footsteps in the hallway, even though no one was there. Objects would move on their own, and the temperature would drop suddenly. As I walked by the window glass on the shop on a sunny day, my own reflection seemed to lunge at me, and it scared the life out of me. A drinking glass exploded on the counter. Doors slammed in the night. Books fell from the shelves, landing with a thunk and a plume of dust. As the days passed, I realized that it wasn't just any spirit haunting me. It was my ex-husband. He was using his new ghostly powers to jump scare me from beyond the grave. The realization left me terrified. If he could do all this, what else was he capable of? I tried to find help, but no one believed me. They thought I was just imagining things or suffering from post-traumatic stress. Sleep-deprived and desperate, I found myself in a police station, explaining the whole thing to a frazzled cop. He glared at me tersely, and I ended up feeling like an idiot. A gunshot rang out even as I told my story. The entire precinct jumped at what ended up being a gun going off by accident. Even so, the cop didn't believe me, of course, and sent me out into the rainy night, terrified of my own shadow. I was alone, trapped in a nightmare that I couldn't escape from. Now, as I sit here in my dark and silent house, I can feel his presence all around me. I was awoken moments ago when the bedroom door cracked violently into the wall. I know that at any minute he could jump scare me again, and this time I fear it won't be a harmless prank. I'm sitting here curled in a ball, shaking as I type this. I'm just trying to get it out, trying to leave behind my story, because I know it's only a matter of time until he scares me to death. I guess I need to write this down, just in case I'm right and I'm dead tonight. My name's Tom. I'm 14 years old, and I did something horrible. I killed someone. Well, I mean, it was an accident. It wasn't just me, but I caused someone's death, or helped to do it. Now he's coming after me. I know that sounds crazy, but it's true, and I need to get all of this stuff off my chest before it's too late. My two best friends are dead. Braden died last Wednesday, and Bart died last Wednesday before that. They were bullies, and I guess I am too. But they were my friends, and I miss them. Bart was kind of the leader, I guess you could say. He was this big, tough kid, and he loved picking on people. I used to think it was funny. That's wrong of me, I know, but you sort of sometimes get, excited that someone isn't picking on you, so you join in when they're picking on someone else. The kid's name was Max, and he was Bart's favorite target. He was this little guy, skinny and short, with big buck teeth and shaggy hair. He wore glasses, and his family doesn't have a lot of money, so his clothes were always too big because they came from his older brother. Hand-me-downs, you know. Max has an older sister, too, this weird girl about to go to college. She always dresses in black clothes and stuff, and everyone makes fun of her and calls her a witch or things like that. She's a total loon. My parents didn't like when I started hanging out with Braden and Bart. Braden was an alright guy, I guess, but he was kind of like me, caught up in Bart's crap and just thankful not to be on the receiving end of everything. Bart beat a lot of kids up. We were just glad not to be getting our asses kicked, I guess. It's not like Bart didn't have good qualities. He was a funny guy, and he could be nice sometimes. His dad is a big jerk, and he had a bad home life. I guess the bullying makes sense when you filter it through that. I'm sure most bullies are kind of like fighting through something when it comes down to it. I mean, no one's just mean for the sake of being mean, are they? Okay, so Bart and Braden and I, we like to play football in Braden's backyard a lot. He's got a big backyard, but at the end it was this little creek, and we'd all taken some spills in there before, running down the line trying to evade tackles or whatever. Bart had the idea that we should invite Max over to play with us. He asked him on a Wednesday after school and was super nice to him, apologized for being so crappy to him, and asked him to come over to play. I was there. Max lit up like a Christmas tree. He seemed so excited to be invited. We laughed about it as we walked to Braden's. Max wasn't with us. He said he had to go home and ask his mom first. We waited for the kid in Braden's front yard, and Bart hit my shoulder when he saw him riding his bike down the street to us. We were all super nice. I don't know, I guess he knew we were being crappy, but we kept catching each other's eye and smirking. We went into the backyard and started tossing the football around. Max was better than any of us thought he was going to be. He didn't seem like the kind of kid who would be good at sports, but he caught everything and had a decent arm on him. He asked if we were going to play a game, and Bart told him that we were. He asked Max if he had ever heard of the game Smeer the... Well, I don't want to say it. My sister's gay, and I love her and support her. I was uncomfortable with the word anytime Bart said it, and he said it a lot. I mean, he said the Q word in a crappy way, like to make fun of people. I'm sure you've heard of the game, he suggested. Max said he'd never heard of it. Bart explained that whoever had the ball was the Q word, and everyone else tackled him. Then he tossed Max the ball. He caught it, and we rushed him, knocking him to the ground. Bart did, at least. Braden, too. I guess I did, as well. Every time Max got up, one of us would knock him down again. Eventually he tossed the ball away, but we didn't stop. We just kept tackling him. Max was crying. He got a split lip. He was bleeding pretty bad, and I turned to the others and told him to stop, but Bart got so pissed that he knocked me down. He told me that if I don't want to play anymore, I could go be the Q word, and he would smear me. So I played. I knocked Max down, over and over and over again. Max tried to run. He ran towards the back of our yard, and we chased him. Bart was the fastest, and he slammed into Max, and the kid went flying into the creek. We stood at the bank, and I'll never forget the sight. Max was dead, lying with his head on a rock, his blood leaking into the slow-moving water. That was about a month ago, and I know I'll never get the sight out of my mind as long as I live. Which won't be that long, I guess. Maybe that's what I deserve. The rest of the day is kind of a blur. Braden's mom was at work, so we called the police. We told them it was an accident, that we had just been playing and Max had slipped, and we had to go down to the station for hours and talk, each of us with our parents and a cop. They asked about the split lip and some bruises, and we all just said that's what happens sometimes when you play football. They bought it. We all went to the funeral. Braden and I were pretty shaken up, and we stopped talking to Bart. I could tell he was shaken up too, but he kept making jokes about it. He wouldn't laugh or anything. I think he was trying to make himself feel better. Like, had it been an accident, Max's sister came up to Bart at the funeral and yelled at him. She was crying, and it was hard to watch. She said she knew something had happened. Her parents had to drag her away from Bart. She told Bart that she would bring her brother back and that he would set things right. We all thought she was crazy. 2 Wednesdays ago, I was asleep when the phone rang. It was like 2 a.m, and I answered. It was Bart. He told me Max was in his yard. I told him that was impossible, but he sent me a picture, and it sure looked like Max, right outside his window. He was just standing there, wearing the suit that he was buried in. His face was all gray and gaunt. Bart was scared. He said he was going to hide. He was home alone for the night. His parents had gone out, and they went out a lot. He said he was hiding in the closet. He begged me to come over, begged me to save him, and he started screaming. The call ended, and I called him back over and over, but he didn't answer. I almost went over there, but I was frozen in fear in my bed. Couldn't convince myself to get out from under the covers. The next morning at school, everyone learned that Bart was dead. His parents had found him earlier that morning. He was dead in his closet. I told Braden everything and showed him the picture Bart had sent me. He was terrified. Last Wednesday was our last day of school before summer. Braden came up to me near the end of the day and told me they'd been outside for gym class and he'd seen Max standing across a soccer field, just by the trees there. When Braden had pointed him out to someone else, Max was gone. Behind a tree, maybe. Braden was scared that Max was coming for him next. The next day, Braden was dead too. His mom found him outside in their backyard. Some kids said his head had been turned around, but I don't know if that's true or not. I wonder if Max's sister really brought him back. She must have. Maybe she really is a witch. Today I woke up and looked out my window and I could see someone standing down the road, just in the center of the street. Small, in a suit. It's Max. I went outside, but he was gone. But I know it was him. I know why he killed Bart first. He knows Bart was the ringleader. Maybe he saved me for last because I tried to stop the others. I don't know. Maybe he won't kill me, but I keep seeing him. He's getting closer. He was at the end of the street earlier. Then when my dad sent me outside to get the garbage cans from the road, he was closer, in a neighbor's yard, staring at me from around the corner of their house. He's getting closer. He's coming for me. I guess I don't really blame him. I grew up in southern Appalachia, in western North Carolina, 30 minutes outside the town of Asheville. The hills and hollers of the Appalachian Mountains are some of the oldest mountains in the world, with some of the rock formations dating back over 1 billion years. That quite literally means they were here before there were terrestrial animals. As with most things that have been on Earth for a long time, there are inexplicable anomalies, both benevolent and malevolent. For example, the Brown Mountain Lights. Never in my life have I felt threatened or uneasy when witnessing them from Wiseman's view. They're neither good nor evil, they just are. On the benevolent side, sometimes you can walk through an abandoned old church up near my mom and dad's property, and you can feel a good, warm, happy energy. It's like that first warm day of summer when the sunshine is not too hot, but not too cold either. Well, this story is not about one such anomaly. It's about something that's definitely malevolent. About a decade ago, I was in night school at the AB Tech, going to school for automotive mechanics. I would go into class about 2 p.m. after I got off my part-time job, and I would end up getting home about 10:30. Depending on the traffic, that is. Every night I drove the same road in my old 1973 W200 Dodge pickup. Some nights it would get rather boring, and I would take a different route, jump off of I-40 and drive the back roads. On this particular evening, I had decided to just stay on the I-40 because I just wanted to get home and go to bed. It was Thursday, and there was no class on Friday. I wanted to get in bed early so I could go up in the woods and go hiking early tomorrow morning and watch the sun come up. As I jumped off the I-40 onto the exit where my parents lived, the night seemed to get darker, and none of the animals that I could hear through my rolled down windows made any more noise. The cab of my truck became smaller and smaller, and my breath quickened. I've never faced any kind of anxiety in my life, but at that moment, something felt off, and there was no way I could put my finger on what it was. I came to a stop on the exit ramp, turned to go down the road, and happened to notice that the gas station off the exit where Mom and Dad lived had no lights on. They were a 24-hour truck stop and always had lights on, but I didn't think about it again after noticing. I just chalked it up to a power outage, but I could not shake the feeling that something was definitely askew. I slowly shifted through all the old truck gears, not wanting to make any more noise than an old pickup truck already did. I leaned over my steering wheel to look up at the moon through the windshield, and there was barely any stars visible, which was way out of the ordinary. If you've ever been to Appalachia, primarily the sparsely populated areas where I'm from, you can see the Milky Way on a clear night. An absence of stars back home is only due to cloud cover, or whatever in the hell went on this particular night. As I rounded a particularly sharp left-hand curve and chugged through a straight stretch before the next right-hander, I looked at the ancient, decaying barn I always gazed at when riding that stretch of road, and thought about how long that thing had been here, and how many advancements and civilizations it had seen. For the split second that my gaze wandered, a very large, sickly-looking dog ran out in front of my truck, no more than 10 feet in front of me. Old Betsy was a good truck, but she didn't stop well. Thump, thump! I heard the fence post I had left in my truck bounce up in the bed and then back into it as I slid to a stop. My first thought was, oh God, now I have to go tell these neighbors that I ran over their dog. That shit doesn't go real far with people around here. It can really kinda set them off, depending on the dog and the person. As I sat there breathing in the smell of burning rubber, something else found its way into my nose. The stench of rotting flesh. It's not a smell you ever forget once you smell it one time. I didn't pay much attention to it at the time. I just chalked it up to some rotting roadkill nearby. Finally, I thought to myself, let me check and see who this dog belongs to. I pushed my clutch in, shifted to reverse, and as I looked in my rearview mirror, illuminated by the haunting glow of my reverse lamps, was the same dog, only it wasn't on 4 legs anymore. It stood up, like a man over 10 feet tall. Only then did it dawn on me that the front of my truck was every bit of 5 feet tall, and this dog was every bit of 5 feet tall at the shoulders on all fours. As it turned its head to look in the direction of my truck, I caught only a glimpse of this creature. It was not a dog. It certainly was not a man. It was somewhere in between, and at the same time, entirely separate altogether. Its skin hung loose off its emaciated frame, like a raccoon. Bits of matted fur and dirt and mud clung to its legs like a disease. The right arm seemed a little bit longer than the left, and they both hung abnormally low in relation to either animal this creature seemed to be. As it regained its senses, it turned and looked into the mirror like it knew exactly where I was sitting. The face was that of a man, but the very edges of its face seemed not to be totally defined. They seemed to move and change, like something you could see at a cellular level in a scientific documentary. There were no eyes, but only sockets where eyes should be. No hair either, and the skin that was dripping off its face was a cold, lifeless gray color. The nose was short and shoved into its face like a bulldog, but the teeth still haunt me. It was definitely carnivorous, and true to form, the rest of its unnatural look, many of its teeth didn't seem to be arranged in a natural way in its mouth. They seemed to fill and spill forth from the undefinable face, almost like they knew the horror they occupied and they were searching for a way out. It stared through my life, into my eyes and past my soul. It seemed like an eternity, but it could not have been more than 5 seconds that I sat there paralyzed. A light came on at the house next to the road, causing the creature to snap its gaze in that direction, tear off into the woods on its back 2 legs. I jammed my old truck into first gear and roasted tires all the way through first, snatched second, and drove as fast as I could home. When I got to the house, both my parents were asleep. I went downstairs into my bedroom and loaded every firearm I possessed and locked all the doors. I couldn't wake them up. Who would believe that? And at 10:30 on a Thursday night? The basement was eerily quiet that night. Even their dog that got up to raise hell outside if any animal came close was dead silent. The old post and beam house didn't even creak or pop that night, as was usual. At about 3 a.m., I finally started to get drowsy, and as I went to lay my head down and get some sleep so I could still attempt to go hiking the next morning, I smelled the stench of death again. It was faint at first, but it was definitely there. I thought to myself, you're just going crazy. None of that was real. But as I dwelt on it, it became more and more noticeable until it filled the entire basement. My dad has a home office in the basement with 2 large glass doors that face the Pisgah National Forest, an impenetrable 500,000-acre wood. I finally worked up the courage to walk out of my bedroom and into the basement's living area, with my little tactical 12-gauge loaded, tack light on. I covered the flashlight with my hand so as not to make my presence known until it needed to be, and as I turned right out of the living room into my dad's office, I shined the light through the glass doors, and at the edge of the woods, there stood the creature. It was motionless. It stared right into the light, unafraid, with those soulless sockets devoid of eyes. I quickly covered my tack light, ran into the living room, and flipped on the outside floodlights in my surprise. But it was no longer standing at the edge of the woods, but between the house and the edge of the woods, still motionless. I swung the door open and fired every round I had in its direction. I must have scored a couple of hits because it screeched an unearthly scream, like that of a woman being slaughtered as it took to the woods. The dog went crazy. Mom and Dad woke up asking what the hell I was doing. I told them that a bear had gotten into the trash and I was scaring it away. They didn't believe me, but I know they wouldn't believe the truth either. I didn't sleep that night, or any time until the following Sunday. Everything seemed to return to normal, and I didn't think about the creature again until I met my wife about 6 years ago. Her mother's house sits at the mouth of the holler, no more than 4 or 5 miles up the road from my mother and father's house. Up on the side of the holler, there's a kennel for her brother's hunting dogs. No longer in use, and hasn't been for years, but the fence is still there, and the concrete pads are still there. It's a thing of great use when you need to quarantine an animal. Her Great Pyrenees had gotten into a tussle with a raccoon, which of course he destroyed, but his rabies vaccine had lapsed, so we had to keep him quarantined for a time. It didn't bother him, he kinda liked solitude. This particular night, we were coming home from a movie date in the neighboring town, was the last night of quarantine for him. So we walked up the trail, using our phone flashlights to get to the kennel, and there he sat, patiently waiting, tail wagging, happy to see us. We put him on a leash and started walking him back towards the house with us. As we were walking back through the darkness, I started to feel that same feeling I'd felt the night I hit the creature in my truck. I didn't say anything so as not to alarm my wife, but when the smell came wafting in on the breeze, she jokingly asked me, "My God, what did you eat? You stink." I half laughed, not being able to fully appreciate the joke for the horror that raged in my mind. She immediately caught on and asked what was wrong, to which I could only reply, "I'll tell you later." She grew up in the woods and around hunting and things of that nature her whole life, so she knew what I meant. She knew we were being watched by something. When we could see the lights of the house from the trail to the kennel, we heard it. There came barking from the kennel that sound just like the Great Pyrenees we had on a leash next to us. It was a perfect imitation. The Pyrenees, being a guardian dog, immediately sensed that something was wrong, and so he turned to face the danger, belting out a deep bark and growl in that direction. I don't know if you've ever had to drag a 150-pound dog, but it sucks, and it's no easy task. I'm 6 feet, 240 pounds, and it was all I could do to get him back in the house. The barking never ceased the entire time we were running for the house. In fact, it seemed to grow closer and closer, till it seemed it was coming from inside my own head. Her mother heard the commotion and flipped the floodlights on, and we made it to the fence of the yard as I caught a glimpse of something coming to a dead stop at the end where the lights reached, wheeling around and tearing off into the darkness. My wife looked at me and said, "You want to tell me what the hell that was?" To which I replied, "Yes, let's go inside." I told her the story and she listened intently, hanging on to every word. Her family came from a long line of granny witches and other supernatural healers from Appalachia, so her older sister came over the next morning with some herbs and chants to bless the property and to ward off evil. I suggested we go up to the dog kennels and do them as well. When we got to the kennels, they were completely destroyed. The very concrete foundation was cracked, and the chain-link fence was torn off its post. The dog houses were destroyed, and the place reeked of the stench that followed that creature. My wife's older sister just went about her business like normal, blessed the place, burnt some herbs, and led us back to the property. When we got into the house, she wheeled about on us suddenly and instructed us very firmly to never go into the woods after dark, not until this thing left me alone. To make a long story short, my wife joined the military, and she ended up getting stationed in Delaware. Well, as someone who lived around fairly large mountains and endless wilderness their entire life, Delaware is pretty terrible. At least, that was my thought when we first moved into the middle of a 50,000 plus population city. Fortunately, though, it didn't take long to find a house in a sleepy little community further south. We purchased the house and moved in with haste. We were both very grateful and glad to be out of the city and into a rural setting again. The land in Delaware seems lifeless in comparison to Appalachia. The sparsely populated woods don't possess any energy that goes one way or t'other. The ground doesn't seem to be alive like it is in Appalachia. Having had no thoughts about the creature in a long time, I resumed my staying outside after dark and playing with our dogs in a rather large yard that bordered on a small patch of woods. Well, last night I went outside to play with the dogs, and as dark set in, I built a decent-sized fire in my fire pit and consumed some good old-fashioned Appalachian mountain cough syrup from a mason jar. And just as the fire was dying down, my American bulldog tore off towards the woods. He has a habit of running off to go on adventures, so my immediate instinct was to chase him down in the yard and tackle him so he couldn't get away. As I tackled his 110-pound ass to the ground and threw him in a fireman's carry over my shoulder, I heard him begin to bark, only the bark wasn't coming from him. The only sound coming from him was a deep, rumbling growl, a noise I've never heard him make before. It was a threatening noise. Something was definitely wrong, and as I ran with him on my shoulder back to the house, the stench of death again began to fill the air. The other two dogs must have caught the wind and what was happening, and met me at the back door, which I threw open, slammed shut, and locked as I again began to load firearms. How the hell could this thing have followed us 650 miles up here? As I flipped the floodlights on at the back side of the house, several of the bushes and small trees at the forest's edge were still shaking like something had just run through them. My dogs went crazy all night, barking and howling and attempting to get out of the windows. I didn't sleep a bit, and I don't think I will for a while. I know for sure I won't be in the woods after dark again. Not in life. Not until this thing is gone. Good evening, everyone. It's me, Dr. Plague. Thank you so much for joining me for tonight's story. No, don't worry. This isn't another Appalachian Grandpa story. This is from a user Subaruligan on Reddit, who also seems to have a love for Appalachia, just like yours truly. If you've been with the channel long, you know that I love the Appalachian area, and I love Appalachian folklore. I hope to make it back there one day. When he talks about Delaware, and he says that the land seems lifeless in comparison to Appalachia, I know that feeling all too well. That's how the Florida sand feels when I sink my toes into it. Just not quite as good as that thick Georgia clay that I'm used to. But anyway, I'll stop waxing poetic and go ahead and thank my sponsors. Thanks to Leslie Lou Riddle and Janet for being our Spooky Skeleton tier contributors. Thanks to Xaronan for being our Ghostly Reader contributor. And thanks to Glenn Jenkins for being our Ghostly Writer contributor. Thanks, everybody. We just couldn't do it without you. If you too would like to support the show, come on down to Patreon. For just $5 a month, you can be part of our Spooky Skeleton tier army and have your name read out at the end of every TikTok and every YouTube video that I do. Spooky Skeleton tier contributors and up also get their videos a day early. So, have your Wednesday video on Tuesday and your Friday video on Thursday. If you enjoy what we do here, I'm sure you can find some other videos at the end. Why not go ahead and watch one? Maybe think about subscribing, hitting that bell so you don't miss a single video. And as always, thanks for stopping by. Dr. Plague, signing off. Have a wonderful evening. I've always stayed sober, as that's a requirement for working as a bartender. You also have to know when one is drunk by the way they walk, the way they talk, and all that. Drunk driving is a major cause of death, after all. The local band was playing some good slow jazz that night. The van that arrived that day was a pretty red. About 8 or 9 people came out of the red van, a sign that they were carpooling. Apparently, the van's driver wanted to make sure that they weren't going to drive home drunk. The dive bar I've been working at always has at least one person going violent in a drunken rage, and last night would have had the usual customer going super crazy after getting drunk, if not for what had happened. The group I was serving was a real piece of work. Each of them ordered Twitch bitches and undying totes, and only one of the guys in the group seemed to not be drinking. Hey, come on, Norman. Why aren't you joining us? Yeah, Norman, don't you enjoy alcohol once in a while? No thanks. I'm allergic. The dirty bum slammed him down. Come on, Norm. Can't you have a drink at least once? Nah, Doc said, sucks to be your doctor. Why don't you drink and have some fun? The band stopped for about 5 seconds. Then they resumed playing, and I asked Norm about his allergy. Look, miss, alcohol give me the hives for days. There's no way I'm going to be able to do it. I'm only here for the music. And the billiards. Come on, Norman, that's BS. You know you want to drink. Then those guys started chanting, Norman! 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 The man refused, even when they were putting the pressure on him. Screw you guys. Screw you and... Then one of the guys from the red van had forced him to drink. He pushed it right up against his lips and forced it down his throat. I should have known something was off from the beginning, but I just went on with my job. Once the drink got into Norman, his body fell to the floor and he started convulsing. The convulsions were violent, and I was about to call an ambulance on him when I heard a loud crack come from him. His eyes turned black and yellow. His normal clean teeth were replaced with sharp yellow fangs. His ginger-colored hair became rough spines and horns. The rest of him made me want to vomit into the nearby trash can. The normal human body with the torso and legs and arms was replaced with something like that of a wolf, but more oily and with claws all over. None of the other guys were aware. They were all too drunk to realize what was going on. The monster that was Norman roared so loud that the band stopped playing, and each band member stared at him with a horrified look on their face. All the other employees were staring in shock as the Norman monster slashed each of the customers to pieces. I reached for my rifle and kept on shooting the Norman monster, but he just wouldn't die. The dive bar owner finally lost it when one of my coworkers got beheaded. The Norman monster kept swinging his claws on all the drunken bums, and they were all bleeding out. It was when the local police officer showed up with a strong tranquilizer gun that he finally got calm. The monster went to sleep by the tranquilizer darts, and once he fell asleep, he changed back into Norman. The incident never made it past the local paper. Normally something this crazy would have made the national news, but it didn't. The bar is currently closed for cleanup and sanitation, so that none of us get sick from the COVID-19. I'm on paid leave for until the bar opens again, since the owner is responsible for the damages caused. I have no involvement in the incident, other than serving the drinks to those guys. But now, I seem to have an aversion to alcohol. Not to serving it, but to drinking it. Every time I see a drink, my own guts keep hurting like I shouldn't be near it. I think Norman's infection may have transferred over to me.